Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's We Create Space webinar. We are absolutely delighted that you're joining us. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us from in the world. Please do let us know. It's great to see your intros coming through. Keep them coming through in the chat box. Let us know your name, your pronouns, who you are, where you're joining us from, what you do. We love to get to know our audience in the absence of seeing you face to face. My name is Neil Hudson-Basing. My pronouns are he, him. I'm the events manager for We Create Space. I am a white male with a bit of a fuzzy beard going on, some piercings, some blonde spiky hair, and I'm wearing a lilac-y mesh top with a colourful collection of trainers behind me. You'll see that I'm joined on screen by my wonderful colleague, Hua. And Hua's going to be leading the conversation, and then our fabulous guest speaker, Ali Hendry, and you'll be hearing from both of them shortly. This is what today's look like. We're going to have a bit of an intro from myself. We'll then have a talk from Ali before in conversation with Ali and Hua, and then we'll do some audience Q&A and some key takeaways. We'd love to hear from you. I'm going to keep this really brief and tell you who We Create Space are. We are a global platform providing DEI solutions, consultancy, services to organizations wanting to make their workplaces more inclusive. And we do this through our collection of over 250 queer change makers. These events, these community events, are our way of giving back as a community interest company. And this is just a brief kind of overview of what we do. But I just want to say that our plea to you is that we cannot do these community events without corporate bookings. So I would love to ask you, if your organization is looking for someone to work with to support you in your DEI provision, then please let us know. We would love to have a chat with you about how we can support your organization. So I'm sure my colleague JP, John Paul, will drop his contact details in the chat box for you to get in touch. So our Queer Living webinar series, we're so excited to deliver this for this half of 2024. We are going to be focusing on an array of topics through an LGBTQ plus lens, lifestyles and relationships, starting with today on polyamory. And then next week, every fortnight on Tuesdays at 4 p.m. British Standard Time, we will be back with another topic. So we've got an array of topics there and a brilliant lineup of speakers. So focusing on bodily autonomy, finance and mental health, access to healthcare, employment and careers, nature and chosen families. Great selection there. Don't miss out. We will keep you informed all the way. Follow us on social media, but we'll also keep you in the loop on our emails. So with this in mind, I would like to hand over to Hua, who's going to introduce today's topic of polyamory. Over to you, Hua.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to have this convo. A brief introduction to me. My name is Hua Okean. My pronouns are they, he. Visual description, I am a white Irish person with platinum blonde hair. I'm wearing a black cutoff tank top and some big white headphones. I am an illustrator, creative researcher. I'm also the communications director at Trans Pride Plymouth, and I am the marketing manager at We Create Space. I've been poly for about 8 or 9 years now. So this is a conversation that I'm really excited to have. Ali has so many amazing insights. I think, Neil, can you get up the polyamory definition? For those of you who don't know, polyamory is the practice of engaging in multiple romantic or sexual relationships with the consent of all people involved. Today, we're going to be talking about polyamory, but also non-monogamy more broadly, which encompasses a lot of different types of relationships that I think Ali is going to give you a little introduction to. But Ali, hello. Do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Oh, yes. Thank you very much for inviting me along and for letting me kick off this great series. I'm very excited to attend the others as well. My name's Ali Hendry. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a white 55-year-old with grey silver hair. I'm sitting in my front room. I've got cushions and a lovely picture of trees in the background. I'm a certified and credentialed holistic life coach, and I specialise in relationships. I also specialise in diversity, equity and inclusion. And I also specialise in public speaking. So there's 3 strings to my bow. Oh, there I am. the purpose of the tape, yeah, so we've got some information about me there. So I run some courses as well. I teach coaches how to become coaches as well. And you can find me every week on the Diva magazine relationship room that I do on Instagram Live. And I'm also a monthly columnist. I do the Love Word, where I talk about my love life in Diva magazine. Okay, so to kick things off, we're just going to do a quick pop it into the chat, if that is available to you. What is the personal benefit of non-monogamy, do you think? I will go more into definitions in a moment, but as you're considering it, what do you think is the personal benefit of non-monogamy? Non-monogamy is the umbrella term. You've got things like polyamory, swinging, open relationships, and I'll go into those in a moment underneath it. So non-monogamy being in a relationship with more than one person. What do you reckon? What do you reckon the personal benefit could be or is if you are non-monogamist? Then pop that into the chat if that is available to you. Don't know if we can take verbal comments as well, if that's available to us as well. So pop that into the chat and let's see where we are at. What's the personal benefit, would you say, of non-monogamy? We've got that written in there. Thank you for putting that. No one relationship has the pressure of meeting all one's relational needs. Thank you very much for that comment. Thank you. Yes, that's something that Esther Perel talks about. You know, she says we live in a world where we are expected to be our partner's therapist and counsellor and best friend and work advisor, and she says it's just not possible. So thank you for that one. That one person doesn't have to be everything for another. Yep, got comments on that as well. Forming more than one romantic relationship, exploration of self, thank you. Being able to be your full self and explore sexuality and relationships. Thank you. Yeah, keep them coming. Now, the reason that I wanted to ask you this question was because some of those experience strong connections with different people who can teach you important things about life, being able to enjoy life and create relationships as I want with no pressure from society. Now, thank you for that. As you're looking at those responses, the reason I wanted to ask that specific question is to start to already draw some parallels between non-monogamy and sexuality, your sexual orientation, because there are some overlaps. There are some things that come up when we're thinking about non-monogamy and other relationship love styles, as I like to call them, and the way that we approach sexuality, sexual orientation. So as some of you have rightly so put in the chat there, things like self-discovery, when you enter more than one relationship at the same time, wow, do you learn a lot about yourself and your limits in terms of time, energy, attention, etc. You also, and it's the same with sexuality, right? When you're exploring your sexuality, there's so similarities there. Increased focus on open communication. Again, think about that in terms of non-monogamy, being in a relationship with more than one person, and also in terms of your sexuality and how you approach your relationships as part of the LGBTQIA+ community. Having diverse emotional and sexual connections, again, that can be on both sides. Exploration of sexuality, as a couple of you have mentioned in the chat there. Things around trust comes up a lot when we're talking about non-monogamy and also talking about sexuality, and a supportive community. Goodness me, when I entered non-monogamy, that was one of the things that I wish I'd known earlier, the importance and the value of using community. And for those of us who've also come out in the LGBTQIA+ community, that's another area, isn't it, where some of us, when we've accessed community, it has supported us enormously. I'm going to quickly whiz through these things because I want to get more onto different types. So if you want to go more into the types, we can go into those a little bit later on. It's just to give you an overview of what is out there. Yes, it's like learning a new language, and there are some great resources out there, which I'll talk about in a moment. So just to let you know that there's lots of terminologies. One of the areas that can come up, isn't this just a form of cheating? Well, cheating, if we think about the definition of cheating, Cheating basically involves secrecy. And how I perceive it is about avoiding your discomfort at the expense of honesty. That's how I conceptualize cheat. There are lots of different definitions, but that's kind of what I've come up with in terms of working with individuals, working with duos, working with groups who are working through cheating situations. So avoiding my discomfort at the expense of honesty. And it happens in all relationship designs. The most important thing that I would say when it comes to cheating is to make sure you know what cheating is, because you think you know, and actually it's a great conversation to be having with your partner or partners. What's your definition of cheating? So make sure that you're doing that. Is it a form of cheating? No, it can come up in all types of relationships. Some people call non-monogamy ethical non-monogamy. I would argue we just need the non-monogamy bit because we don't say ethical monogamy. So, you know, we are assuming that it is on the right side in terms of monogamy and a non-monogamy. And both types of relationships will involve those relationship agreements, will involve those boundaries. Those are about you setting and maintaining your boundaries in your relationships. And understanding. I would say those are the three key foundations. Some people will say communication should be a key foundation. I think communication comes under understanding. I think understanding comprises communication, curiosity, and compassion. So I would suggest that those three areas, agreements, boundaries, and understanding, are paramount. Is non-monogamy an identity or a relationship design? Oh, it's one of those questions you didn't know you wanted to know the answer to this, right? Is it something you are, or is it something you do? And are there some parallels in terms of sexual orientation as well? Now, for me personally, I think my non-monogamy is an identity in the way that lesbian is also my identity. And I also fully recognize and understand that some people may not see it as an identity. They might see either of those things, their relationship lifestyle and their sexuality. They might see them as an identity, or they might see them as a choice or a lifestyle. And particularly when we think about countries, for example, where LGBTQIA plus people are discriminated against, have absolutely no rights, it may be that sometimes individuals will lend towards finding it easier to call it a lifestyle in terms of, instead of an identity, if identity is not available to them in the culture in which they are growing up. So it's an interesting conversation to have, I think, around both sides there. Non-monogamy and queer culture, where are those overlaps? Let's have a little dive into that. So both non-monogamy and queer culture have got forced marginalization, as you know. Some of you, if not all of you, may have experienced that or have witnessed it, whether you are an ally or whether you are part of that, any of those communities. So rejecting those systems of oppression may be something that comes up when you are in that non-monogamy or that queer culture. Underground communities, again, historically and also currently, that's something that the two sides share. And queer liberation, I mean, when we talk about things like relationship anarchy and chosen families, relationship anarchy is sometimes called a relationship love style. It's actually more of an ethos. A relationship anarchist is somebody who tries to be non-hierarchical in all their relationships. Romantic relationships, family relationships, friendships, work relationships. They have a flat structure in terms of the importance and the value of individuals in their lives. So it's a way of being, an ethos, if you like. I think when we talk about non-monogamy and queer culture, just staying on this slide for a moment, there's been some recent research around queer people avoiding non-monogamous spaces. And some of this has been particularly for lesbians or pansexual women, trans women, due to fetishization. I knew I was going to struggle with that word. It's one of those words you've got to take a run up to it, right? Fetishization. There we are, got it out. Fetishization by cis men in those spaces. And also some unethical practices in terms of where a cis couple, a heterosexual man and a bisexual woman, are looking for a woman to love them equally. It's called unicorn hunting, to recognize that there is this primary relationship and the third person is an add-on, to bow down to the couple privilege. It's unethical. Of course, currently, as we know, we are in a Bisexual Awareness Week, so celebrating that. Last year, I read this brilliant book. If you haven't read it and you are also in the bisexual community or an ally as I am, Julia Shaw, The Hidden Culture, History and Science of Bisexuality, absolutely brilliant book. I strongly recommend that one. So looking at how actually an open community, non-monogamy community, can still have discrimination. There's also something about privilege in terms of entering a non-monogamy space. Being able to have more than one relationship at the same time takes resource. And so looking at how marginalized intersectional people may not actually be able to afford some of the things that come up. And so you will find non-monogamy spaces that are very cis-white in their space. Running out of time. How long have I got left? 5 minutes?
Yeah, about 5 minutes.
About 5 minutes. Okay, fantastic. I wanted to go into some other things about the place of marriage, but we might have time at the end to talk about that and how gay people embraced marriage. And actually, maybe we didn't want to embrace it. Maybe we just felt we needed it because we wanted to have the same. And actually, when we look at marriage at the moment, I said I wasn't going to talk about it. I am. In 2020, there was a 61% decrease in marriages from 2019. Now, of course, some of that was because of COVID. This is from the Office of National Statistics. It's interesting to think about marriage and the place of it and whether we need it or not. So, yes, culture shifts. Similarities in non-monogamy and LGBT, coming out, that vulnerability of coming out when you're coming out as someone. And I've done both. I've come out as both, coming out as lesbian when I was 28, coming out as non-monogamous 8 years ago. And one of the things that happens, I think, on both sides when you come out is, yes, there's that vulnerability. How is this going to be received? And also both those things, non-monogamy and LGBT, potentially the recipient of the information as you come out might be thinking about your sex life, because sex is involved in both those things. So, around that, there could be a potential discomfort. Erasure is a big part as well in terms of those culture and the similarities. If you're a non-monogamous person and you're only in one relationship at that time, or you are single, you're still non-monogamous, right? It's like when you're lesbian, a single lesbian is still a lesbian. So that kind of erasure, as we know, the bisexual community being in a relationship and being completely erased, whether you are, whoever you're dating, which is of course not okay, and it's on the increase. There's an increase of people who are embracing non-monogamy. There's an increase of people who are exploring and embracing LGBTQIA. 23% of Gen Z and millennials have experienced non-monogamy, compared to 5% baby boomers and 5% of Gen X. LGBT folk, 20% Gen X and 10% millennials in the LGBT arena, and 5% baby boomers and 6% Gen X's. Okay, where are we at on the legals? Well, there are 3 places, all in Massachusetts, that have worked very hard on bringing in non-monogamy into the legal realms. These are around domestic partnerships, hospital and medical rights, parental rights, and housing benefits. So there are things happening. There is progress being made around these areas. And actually, when we look at some of the areas in the UK, so for example, if you look at my daughter's school, so where my daughter went to school, my ex-wife and I, my ex-wife now has another long-term relationship. So the people who were allowed to be there, the call were 3 people. So we were allowed to have 3 people, whereas some schools, they say, oh no, you can only have 2 people. So although that wasn't used for non-monogamy, it was still a policy that served, a child with essentially 3 parents, from not from non-monogamy, but from relationship changing. So it's interesting to look at those policies and procedures. I think there should be workplace policies out there. We should be thinking about this as we move forwards. Yes, the Equality Act 2010 does talk about sexuality and relationship status. However, non-monogamy hasn't featured in any of those areas. There haven't been any cases around that. So when we look at it locally, when we look at organisations and what they could do, you could bring it into your own diversity and inclusion policy, or you could be looking at respect for privacy around that. I do a lot of work with menopause. I've written some menopause training that travels around nationally across the UK, and that is used respect for privacy. You know, it's nobody else's right to say that you're in your menopause season. It's the same with your any kind of status that is yours to share, should you so wish. Of course, we can bring in bullying and harassment policy areas, parental and compassionate leave, and those healthcare and wellbeing benefits. Those can all be melded with a non-monogamy bent. That's me. I managed to get it done. I can't believe it.
Great job. There was so much to get through there. And also you've got me thinking about the fact that I've never really considered whether I think of like non-monogamy as being like a thing that I do, or if it's an identity. And now I'm like, I need to go like puzzle that one myself. But yeah, thank you so much. That was so informative. I think to sort of kick off our little conversation, let's go to what is probably like, I'd say the #1 question I get whenever people find out that I'm non-monogamous, which is about jealousy. And I'd love to, I guess, hear, Ali, a little bit about how like jealousy has shown up in your non-monogamy journey, and if there were any strategies that you find helpful in kind of navigating that.
So much so that she did a TED talk. I don't know if we can pop it into the chat there, but I did do a TED talk in 2 years ago called Survivor's Guide to Jealousy. And it was an interesting one because what happened with my jealousy journey is that when I entered non-monogamy, I actually found it easier to manage my jealousy, which is counterintuitive in a way, because you think, well, hang on, if you're having relationships with more than one person, isn't that going to make it even worse? What I found when I entered the community, and I mentioned community earlier, is a supportive community that says, actually, when we look at jealousy, it's a messenger. So get rid of the shame thing, easier said than done, but get rid of that thing that says, oh, you shouldn't feel jealousy. You know, it's you feeling insecure. What's wrong with you? Oh, that's a terrible emotion to have. Get rid of that and start getting curious. And so what I found with my jealousy journey is that I started tracking back and thinking, where have you come from? Where did you start? Where did you germinate from? And I talk about this in the TED talk. One of the things that I'll mention now is that scanning for risk thing that I talk about. So thinking that something's going to go wrong, that I need to keep ahead of the game. I need to know what you're doing and where you are and the conversations and whose pictures you're liking on Instagram, because that'll somehow protect me. And I was thinking, where does all this come from? And when I was 16, my parents very suddenly and very unexpectedly announced that they were getting divorced. And this was in the 80s. Nobody had divorced in the village that I grew up in. It was completely from left field, as far as I was concerned. Of course it wasn't, but it felt left field. And so I learned that relationships are full of surprises that you don't want. And somehow that kind of got embedded into me and started coming out as jealousy. So as soon as I started to realize some of these patterns that started way back when, I was able to start to unpack them and look at them. And with the help of therapy, I was able to explore those. What I find now is the best way to approach jealousy is compassion, and also recognizing that you don't have to do it on your own. It's something that you can approach together as a team. Jealousy is the thing over here. You're the, you know, whether you are the one who's experiencing it, or whether you're on the other side. It's, you know, you're in this relationship together, whether there's 2 of you or more. So what can you work on together? How as a team can you approach jealousy? What's yours? what's theirs. You know, it's okay to ask for support. It's okay to ask for support. Working out what's yours, what's theirs, what's the relationship designs.
Yeah.
I could go
Oh my
on.
gosh, I totally hear that. I think that that really speaks to my experience as well. I find that it's kind of similarly to you, almost like as someone who was previously like suffering from a lot of symptoms associated with BPD, and like that being like this jealousy, this fear of abandonment, that kind of insecurity. You would think that non-monogamy would be like terrible for that, that it would really exacerbate those things. But I find that it was kind of like strength training for me, that I was able to, again, get curious about why I'm having this reaction. I think a lot of people, jealousy is like this intensely awful feeling for us. And so we default to being like, I need my partner to stop doing whatever is making me feel jealous. And so it's about curbing a behavior instead of going like, well, why do I feel like this? Like, is this, rational? Am I feeling this way because I'm not having my needs met? And really then being able to go into it with your partner and say like, hey, like I'm feeling this way, in a total non-judgmental space. It's not anyone's fault, but being able to appreciate that, like, hey, I'm experiencing this emotion. Can we sort of parse it together? I think is like been such a huge step for me in my kind of mental health journey, alongside just building like a sustainable non-monogamous relationship. So to sort of link into that, Ali, what do you think monogamous people could kind of learn from non-monogamy?
I think the main thing is to be the best version of you in any kind of relationship is to know you. And we are in a world where we have so much information available to us, where we can find out more about ourselves and who we are and what makes us tick. And so I think when we look at our own way of being in relationships, and some of that, as I've mentioned, is about tracking back, so looking at things like your attachment style and working out how you relate to people in relationships. Some of it is about those things that can be worked on. So I'm a coach, and us coaches, we look at the present and the future. We focus on, where are you at now? Let's get clarity. Where do you want to get to, and what are the steps that you can take to get there? Therapists, there are a lot of therapists who bring in a coaching approach as well, which is great. What therapists do really well is they take you back into the past and look at what happened and start to do some healing so that you can move forwards from there. So looking at things like codependency and people pleasing, coaches can work on, what are you doing now? How do you want to be? And how can we unpack some of those things and reform them so that you are in that relationship in a way that serves you? In therapy, they will take you back into the past. They will look at what's created those patterns and help you heal around that. So, and of course, there's loads of books, and we've got some references that we will talk about. So I think whatever your relationship design is, I mean, I certainly had to learn a lot about communication when there's more than one person at the same time in a relationship. And so I needed to learn about my communication style and what works and what doesn't, and how adaptable I need to be. One of the things that, as someone who's non-monogamous, I really focus on is time, energy, and attention. Time, energy, and attention. That's from a book called Why It's Not Okay to Be Non-Monogamous, by Justin L. Clardy. Brilliant book. And he talks about time, energy, and attention. And it's not finite. Love is finite. You can love hundreds of people, millions of people. But time, energy, and attention are not finite resources. And I think this is useful in whatever your love style is, because you've got to still do you. You've got to be able to manage your day and also, be the partners or partner as well. So I think looking at the resourcing side of things is something that we can learn from.
Yeah, definitely. I've heard people make the joke before that non-monogamy is for people who have like a time management kink. And that is so true, in that, you really, I think it makes you sit down and think about like, yeah, like maybe, you want to like pursue all these different people, but you only have so many kind of hours in the day. And I think then there can be this kind of process of thinking about maybe like, not all of your relationships might look the same. They might not all have the same kind of energy or the same type of commitment, but that doesn't necessarily mean that one's more important than the other. I also think the communication thing is so real. There's so much, I think, in non-monogamy, when you're doing it well, whenever like everyone's kind of happy, there are so many things that you have to make explicit that in kind of mononormative, that's the word, mononormative kind of relationship, we just take for granted. We never maybe make explicit. And I've seen the parallels sometimes as a trans person dating other trans people. Often in intimacy, we're kind of primed to have conversations about like, how do you feel about like these parts of your body? Are you okay with me like touching there? Like, you know, what way do you want me to talk to you? Like, how do you feel, kind of what feels best and what feels most comfortable for you? And that's the kind of thing that everyone should do all the time, right? Like not just like trans people who are primed to do it because we know that we might have complicated relationships with our bodies, but everyone has that. And I think non-monogamy has a similar kind of thing to that, where there's often a lot more upfront conversation about expectations, about what we want from a relationship, about what we don't want from a relationship. And just being able to talk about that stuff, it doesn't like remove the mystery or anything. It just means that you're more primed to kind of look after the other person and make them happy, I think.
Yeah, definitely. When it comes to intimacy, when it comes to safe sex, you get very comfortable with talking very openly. And I think not to bring down lesbians, but bringing down lesbians, we especially of my age, in our 50s, there was no such thing as safe sex. Oh, you don't need to think about safe sex. And I think I still come across women who think that they are non-binary folk, who think that they are somehow it's not going to happen to me. And so trying to educate people as I go along that that's not the case, and that we do need to be having these open conversations is paramount. Absolutely.
Yeah,
It's interesting
and talking about it can be sexy. It can be a vibe. Like,
yeah, because it's part of consent. It's part of consent.
Yeah.
You're giving me information to help me decide on whether we go forwards or not, and consent is sexy.
It is.
Fact.
So as you kind of touched on this with, you know, that non-monogamy is on the rise, and especially amongst younger generations, we're seeing it become more and more popular, as we're also seeing more and more younger generations identifying as LGBT. So as it's becoming more common, what impact do you see non-monogamy having on our kind of wider world, on maybe how we think about relationships generally, or how we kind of function as a society?
What if it is leading towards the eradication of cheating?
That's so interesting, because I think cheating is such a, like, I really appreciated what you said earlier about the fact that you should be discussing with your partner what cheating is, because everyone has a different definition, and it is valid for everyone to have a different definition. You know, like some people's boundaries are different from others, but if you don't know what those boundaries are, then you can't know if you're gonna step on them. That's so interesting though. Can you, what do you think that would look like if we could abolish the concept of cheating, if we could kind of move past it?
I think it would be really interesting. I mean, Dan Savage, who is a sex columnist based in the US, he talks about the sort of he runs a column. He writes a column mainly for straight people who are looking for advice, and he's talking about this kind of epidemic of cheating in monogamy that is happening. And he's saying it's so interesting because gay men have been really good at having non-monogamous relationships where trust and safety and respect are at the forefront, and have been doing it for years. And so the cheating doesn't come up in that way, because we, you know, you're open and honest in the first instance. So I think what I'm talking about is knowing yourself, knowing discomfort, being able to have those conversations, leaning into what you want, being able to be honest with your partner or partners about how you're feeling and what is and what isn't working, is all laying the groundwork for mitigating against cheating in relationships.
Yeah, I think so many of us are, you know, we're primed to, again, whether it's like jealousy or kind of territorialism, that discomfort, we just don't want to deal with it. and we want to like sort of eradicate it, and so often then that becomes an instinct to kind of control another person, and that's something that I personally like find really freeing, is being able to let go of that and being able to embrace that, you know, I want my partner to be as happy and as fulfilled as possible. And, you know, I know that, you know, regardless of how much they love me or, you know, what they get out of our relationship, that doesn't mean that they're not going to like find lots of beautiful things with other people. And there's something so empowering about being able to like recognize that and get to the point where, you know, knowing that kind of like whatever they're doing, whatever other relationships that they're having, that you feel solid enough in your relationship to just be happy for them. Like that's so much better than having to like worry about like, oh, like, are they liking pictures of like half naked people on Instagram and that kind of behavior. You know, whenever me and my friends will like watch Love Island during the summer, and I always think that it's a bit like, for me, it's like watching like David Attenborough. Like it feels like a completely different sort of like species, a completely different type of like really way to handle a relationship. I would love to see. I'm like, Ali, they should get you into the like Love Island villa to give like a primer
Get me
on
there.
it.
Get me
I
there.
would pay so much money for that.
Oh my gosh, all of those. I want to be in there going. In fact, I was in 2020, I was in a show called Lesbian Guide to Straight Sex, which was on Channel 5. We had 2 episodes of it, and then and that was so much fun. So there was myself and 3 other lesbians, and what we were doing is setting tasks for straight couples who were very much connected, very much in love, which was important, but had a dwindling sex life. So we were there to set them tasks, to talk about what they needed to be doing, and to learn from our experiences and you know, and yeah, experiences basically. It was so much fun. I would love to do that so much. And I love what you said earlier, because you're talking about compersion. People might not have heard of this. It's a brilliant book that was out this year. I interviewed Marie in the relationship room, Marie Thuin, and it's called What is Compersion? And compersion is your joy at your partner's joy. So you experience joy when you see them holding their partner's hand, or a certain little smile, or, you know, a moment that is not part of you, and you can still enjoy it. And so it's, some people say it's the opposite of jealousy. I would disagree, because I've felt compersion and jealousy at the same time towards the same person. So what's that about? And compersion is something that anyone can experience. I equate it to when you see somebody doing something and you feel that sense of joy. So when I can still remember the first time that my daughter tied her shoelace. She didn't need me. She was in the moment. She was doing it. Her joy at being able to finally do it was my joy. And this can happen in any situation. So I think compersion is where somebody is doing something that is nothing to do with you, and they're in their passion, they're in their own joy, they're in their own, you know, sublimeness, if you like, and you're witnessing it and you're part of that. So compersion is something, when it happens in relationships, it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Oh, that's so lovely. I didn't even know that word existed. Shockingly. So that's going in my vocab bank. Ali, I was wondering if we could maybe talk for a second about, how do you think like navigating these kind of like conversations in the workplace? Like, I don't know if you've disclosed like at work. I've disclosed at work, but I work at We Create Space, so like that was not a big deal. But yeah, do you have any advice for people who maybe are kind of near the beginning of their non-monogamy journey, and they don't know how to like sort of talk about it or veer around it at work, or whether it's about like bringing different partners to work events and the sort of the tension around that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, because not all of us want to be, you know, hey, I'm holding the flag, the non-monogamy flag. And it's such a personal, intimate journey for you, and working out what you're comfortable with and what you're not comfortable with. And you may be in an environment where you're thinking, they're just not ready. This company, this fusty old company, is just not ready. Or you may be in an environment where one of the senior managers talks about non-monogamy, or perhaps you have a weekly, let's look at a TED talk and have a conversation. Oh, look, somebody's, you know, put a TED talk up about non-monogamy. How interesting. So it may be that there feels like there's a safety and an avenue. I would say just tune into where you're at, because it's a new toy, right? When you first come out and realize, actually, I do believe that I can be in love with more than one person at the same time, or I do believe that I can have sex and intimacy with more than one person at the same time. It's new for you, and you kind of want to go, well, hey, I want to share it. That's great. Just think about, you don't have to. Just because you're going on this journey doesn't mean that you have to bring everyone else. There is a timing thing. It absolutely not saying you don't have to come out. However, think about, why now? Why now? Is it because of your joy and excitement and you want to bring both your partners to the Christmas do? Fantastic, brilliant. Is that safe for you? Is that safe for your partners? What would you have? Are you ready for those conversations? You know, anything new, you've got to talk and over talk, really. The first time one of my partners and I went to a sex club, I actually enjoyed the prep more than, I mean, obviously we did have fun at the sex club, but I enjoyed the prep and the conversations we'd had and the way that we just went into anything and everything. We both also talked to our best friends about what might come up. So we had even more information that we then brought to each other. So just over talk, basically, and look at those little areas that could come up and that will need some support.
Yeah, always better to over communicate than under communicate whenever it comes to these things, I feel. I think just before we go to the audience questions, we've got some resources that Ali has kindly put together for you all in case you are interested about kind of finding out more about non-monogamy, about, you know, whether this is for you. All of these are like really, really great resources.
Yeah, there's so much out there. I mean, if you do like a workbook, there's loads of workbooks, but that is my favorite workbook, the Polyamory Journal. It's great, it's simple, it's got great definitions, great exercises. Polysecure, Jessica Fern has just released another book as well last year, which is equally great. If Polysecure is about attachment trauma and consensual non-monogamy. So if you like attachment theory, that's a good one. And there are so many general ones, some of them very old fashioned. This one I like as a general, Opening Up by Kristen Taramino, who also has a great podcast called Sex Out Loud.
Amazing, thank you so much. Neil, have we got questions?
What a conversation. Yes, we do have some questions for you from the audience. We've still got time for a few more questions, so please pop them in. Our first one, Ali, you touched on this already, but I want to pop this question to both of you. It's from Florent, and it's, how can non-monogamous individuals navigate societal stigma or misunderstanding about their relationship structure? And Florent says, talking about it to my parents, for example. Hua, I'll come to you first for this one, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am from Belfast. I'm from Northern Ireland. My parents are, like Irish Catholic, and being like queer and trans and poly has obviously been like a huge process of navigation there. And honestly, to this day, the poly is probably the one that they're the most hung up on. I think that something that I actually literally just clicked earlier when Ali was talking is that I think my parents think of they've come to think of me being queer and being trans as an identity that is like intrinsic to me that they have to accept. I think they think of me being poly as like something that I do, like a salacious behavior. And so now I'm wondering, like, maybe I should be talking to them about it more in the sense of an identity, and maybe that could be helpful. It's tricky, and I think it can be really hard to kind of to protect both your own like heart and like that of your partners, because people can be really like weird about it. For me, in terms of like my parents, it's been a process of like thinking quite carefully about what information I want to disclose. If I'm having a kind of casual relationship where it's very meaningful to me and I really care about the person, but I don't necessarily think that like it doesn't make sense for me to like bring it up to my parents and like open that whole conversation up. So it's a thing about, knowing that it's your information to disclose as you will. And that's a conversation that also, you can then have with the partner in question, be like, you know, does it matter to you that if you're like a big integrated part of my life that like every single person knows about? You know, I would never be down to be in a relationship with someone where it felt like it was a secret. But in terms of navigating stigma, sometimes it's kind of, these are intimate relationships and they're for me primarily, so I don't always feel the need to like talk about them widely. I'm also very lucky that I'm surrounded by people who get it, and also more and more people that I know locally are being like, hey, like, I think I feel some kind of inclination towards this. I think there's a lot of curiosity that people kind of haven't been ready to talk about. There's a lot of people who, I think especially queer people who and bisexual people who have maybe primarily dated, had one kind of like relationship style, and maybe haven't felt that they've been able to explore their queerness. And, you know, then like later in life are like, maybe it's time for me to kind of dive into there. I think it's a beautiful tool for like self-exploration. And I think that's also a great way to kind of explain it to other people, you know, to say, it's not just about sex. If it is about sex, that's really fine and cool. But for plenty of us, it's about a real like sense of wanting to grow, learn more about ourselves, to be able to have lots of like intimate, meaningful connections. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's really fun, actually.
Thank you so much. Ali, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, so much. But I'll keep it short. Boundary work and finding a reference point. So this is a great way for working out. When we talk about the word boundaries, you know, it's thrown around a lot. And what we talk about with boundaries is, imagine, if you like imagery, imagine you in your field, imagine other people in their fields. And so you're in your field, you get to decide what your yeses are, what your nos are. You get to decide who comes into your field. You get to put those boundaries in place. You get to decide what behavior is okay, what questions are okay, and what questions are not okay. So I like what you said earlier, you know, when you were saying about questions. Sometimes people will ask you a question. And I was talking to a client the other day, and they said, oh, do you know what I always say? They said, and they're non-monogamous. And they said, what I always say is, you know, if a friend asks me a question and I'm just like, oh my God, that's really intimate. This client said, I just say to them, thank you for that question. We don't know each other well enough for me to answer that yet. It's just like, that's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. So thinking about boundary work, that also will protect you. Boundaries are there to protect you. There's some great books out there. Again, I can recommend them. Boundaries are there to protect you. So it may be that you're going to have to put those in place when you are talking to people who don't see the world in the way that you see the world. The second thing that I was going to say in terms of finding a reference point, finding a way in. So what is going on for you that is like their experience? How can you draw an analogy with your relationships and what they know of the world? And this works really, really well with any kind of DEI work, where you kind of go, right, what am I working with? Where are they coming from? What do they know and what don't they know? And I'll start softly, and choose my battles, because sometimes it's not gonna, you know, it's not gonna work. I was fine with my parents. They were just like, oh, it's another thing. Yeah, it's just Ali being Ali. So, and curious. My mum listens to my relationship room every week. We have conversations about it. So I write for medium.com as well. You can find me on there writing relationship articles. She reads those. So I talk very openly. I guest on a lot of podcasts. I've also got my own podcast called Love with a 3 for the E, Love Across the Pond. So I'm out there and I'm talking about it, and I'm happy for them to come to me. Sometimes I will go to them, but generally the stuff's out there and they can ask me questions if they want to ask me questions. My dad, not so much, not really interested. My brother, not so much. My sister, yeah, interested. So sometimes it's about waiting for them to come to you. But I take your point, the person who asked the question, it's like, how do I educate them? How do I go? And it can feel like a big thing. You just do you, look after you, get your support, get that in place before you start talking to other people, because you deserve to be held, you deserve to be safe and seen. And so start with the safety side of things before you start sharing with other people who may not get it in the way that you get it.
Thank you both. I think we've got time for one more question, and it does tap into a little bit of boundaries and maybe kind of like your perception of other people's boundaries. The question's from John. It says, are there any subtle or subdued indicators, apart from the obvious ones, for someone that isn't sure if polyamory is for them or not, or not, or if their partner might be polyamorous?
Can you read that again about the subtle thing? Sorry.
Are there any subtle or subdued indicators for
Oh,
someone that
right.
isn't
Okay.
sure if polyamory is for them or not, or if their partner might be polyamorous?
Got it. Yeah. I mean, all relationships constantly evolve, right? Everything evolves. If you've been together with your partner for a while, the things that floated your boat at the beginning in sex change. Everything always changes. The one thing we can be sure of, as we know, is change. So if you're thinking, I don't know if this is going to be part of our future together, the way to approach it is, it's like we said with jealousy, is to think about, how do we see this as a team effort? Let's start listening to podcast episodes once a week on polyamory. The Polyamory podcast is great. It's got hundreds and hundreds of different topics. Let's start reading a book or listening to an audiobook together, or you read the book and put notes in the column, and then I'll read it and look at your notes and add in some other notes, or we'll work through. So you don't have to do anything. You don't have to do this. We live in this culture that says, now rush, do, and actually you don't have to do anything until you're ready. So yes, absolutely, start the conversation by a whole my friend situation, in terms of using a third resource that you can both be looking at, and just keep tuning in with you. If you feel you're being coerced, if you feel it's not for you, but they want it, this is where the work comes in, around really tuning into, maybe this relationship is becoming something that's not right for me. And it's really important. I help people as a coach. I help people who are going into non-monogamy and also coming out of non-monogamy. So it's just living a life that you absolutely deserve to live and feels right for you, instead of feeling you have to do something. So I don't know if that helps in any way. Yeah, those are my thoughts.
Thank you so much. Just before we go to you, Hua, for final comment, closing question for you all. What are your main takeaways from today's session? Please do drop them in the chat box. Hua, did you have anything you wanted to add to close?
I mean, I think Ali summed that up really wonderfully, that yeah, especially if you're like in an existing relationship, it's about being really sort of taking your time, I think, and not rushing into it. I think a lot of people have this, say the idea of like the dreamy like threesome, and it's all so much more complicated and like emotionally kind of challenging than it might seem. So I think taking time to make it a kind of activity like that, where you're both listening to each other and considering, yeah, don't get jealous, get curious. That's literally so good.
I love that.
It's a great title for a yeah. I might use that for my next title in Medium. That's great.
Brilliant,
I love that.
brilliant takeaway. So our takeaways are, there are many moments you need to look inward about what you want and who you are in non-monogamy before reaching out to your partners. Non-monogamy is the best way to beat cheating. If you have more takeaways, please do share them. We have absolutely loved today's conversation. Please, everyone, give a bit of appreciation to our guest speaker, Ali and Hua, for hosting this conversation. It has been absolutely brilliant. We will share all of these resources with you. We've got another one coming through, having more open conversations with our partners, and again, very much something that can be translated to monogamy as well. We've got a lot of thank yous coming through, that monogamy can learn a lot from non-monogamy, exactly that. And we'll share all the resources with you. We'll share the recording with you if you thought it was that good that you'd love to watch it again. Please do share with anyone you feel might benefit from listening. And thank you so much. Our next Queer Living webinar will be the 1st of October, and we will be looking at bodily autonomy, and we're joined by another two fantastic speakers. Thanks so much, everyone. We will see you soon.